fighting for freedom, liberty, and the restoration of the Constitution. The Patrick Riggins Show. Now on News Talk 98.7 WOKI. Here's your host, Patrick Riggins.
Welcome back this week to the Patrick Riggins Show. The one show on the radio providing you with a clear-cut solution to the problems our country faces. Less government. That's it. That's the golden arrow that would fix a multitude of problems. Thank you for joining me again this week here on our news station, News Talk 98.7. We have a substitute teacher this week. We have a substitute producer, Micah, sitting in the other room in there. How's it going? I think Jay, isn't he reporting for probation or something like that? I can't give him too hard of a time because he will be back next week. And then nothing I'm doing will work because ultimately behind the glass, they control the show.
That's right.
All right. Again, welcome to the show. And we are providing the solution for the problems our country's facing. Your taxes are too high, less government. There's the solution. Too many regulations, less government. Economy not doing too well, less government. That is the aspirin for our country, a cure for what ails us. And each week we are here bringing you the information, the ammunition you need to rebut the people in your life who seek government solutions to everything, even to problems that don't really exist. But the government says they do, and that's good enough for them. This week I want to kind of jump right into it. I've talked about how we need to stay out of this big problem in Syria and the problems they're experiencing over there. And unfortunately, it really falls on deaf ears. Not that the White House is actually listening to this show. They should. If they would, they would just be perpetually reelected. But, even the conservative commentators I've listened, and they're saying that we need to go over there and stick our noses into Syria's business. And the reason I bring this back up is I ran across this story on Friday that the Obama administration, they denounced Russia for providing Syrian President Bashar Assad, providing his regime with anti-ship missiles. And their statement was saying the weapons would only worsen a war that Washington and Moscow have been promising to work together on stopping. Now remember, or maybe you don't know if you aren't a regular listener to this show, Russia has naval bases in Tartus, which is in Syria, if you couldn't guess from those contextual clues. So Russia has a reason to keep the current administration in Syria in power, or at least help them out in order to try and stabilize their country where Russia's bases are located. Now, General Martin Dempsey, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, he criticized what he called an, quote, unfortunate decision that will embolden the regime and prolong the suffering. And he spoke at a news conference after the New York Times reported that Russia recently delivered an advanced version of an anti-ship cruise missile to Syria. Dempsey went on to say it's ill-timed and very unfortunate, and Defense Secretary Chuck Hagel also urged Russia to rethink its military aid. He said that the U.S. and Russia both wanted to stabilize Syria after more than 2 years of civil war, but the Kremlin's military support makes that situation even more dangerous. So Russia should rethink its military aid. This is what Washington's saying. This, while our country sends over $110 million in aid to the Syrian rebels, plus at least $60 million in February and $45 million last September. And that's just what we know about. That's not counting covert aid going over there. We have military people advising the rebels from bases in Jordan. And there's rumors circulating that we are actually in country in Syria, helping them there as well. But Russia needs to rethink its military aid. Russia, who has naval bases located in that country, while we send aid but have no bases, no real legitimate reason to support either side in this conflict. Now, Hagel went on to say, what we don't want to see happen, what we don't want to see happen, the Russians don't want to see happen either. And that's for Syria to erupt to the point where we may well find a regional war in the Middle East. He went on to say, so we continue to work with the Russians on their interests and everything we can do to convince the powers that are involved in the region to be careful with escalation of military options and equipment. He also added that the U.S. was planning for every military contingency. Again, I'll say, we are actively supporting one of the sides in this conflict. We are there. So basically, we're telling everyone not to do what we are already doing. And we wonder why we have lost just about all respect in this world. Now, for the Obama administration, the anti-ship missiles are the second such worrying report in as many weeks at a time when Secretary of State John Kerry and Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, I believe that's how you pronounce that, they say they were coordinating closely to try to get Syria's government and the rebels into the start of some sort of peace negotiation. They are hoping the talks begin next month in Geneva. Yeah, that's going to work. Peace talks. When both sides are just so mad at each other and have major military countries feeding them both weapons and advice. You know, Russia is, obviously feeding Syria weapons, as we just said, and I'm sure they're sending them covert aid as well, just like we're doing with the Syrian rebels. Yet we say they're doing the wrong thing, but we're doing the right thing. Now, almost immediately after last week's announcement of a new peace push, Israeli officials warned that Moscow was preparing to give Assad state-of-the-art ground-to-air missile systems in the coming months. Now, both sets of missiles would only add to the administration's reservations as it evaluates a range of options, including military ones, of course, to break the stalemate in Syria's civil war and respond to evidence that Assad's forces used small amounts of chemical weapons in 2 attacks in March. Now, the cruise missiles and the surface-to-air batteries would significantly upgrade the Assad regime's capacity to target manned planes, drones, and incoming missiles. Successful Israeli strikes in recent weeks on weapons convoys to Hezbollah show the Syrian defenses are still far from impregnable, but the new weaponry would make it harder for United States to consider enforcing a no-fly zone in the country or otherwise intervening militarily. Well, there you go. If we aren't planning on sending planes and ships or troops into this conflict, then why would we be worried about new weaponry in the area? So that tells you right there, we do plan on sending planes, ships, and probably troops into this conflict when we really have no reason to do so. Dempsey also warned specifically about these surface-to-air missiles, saying they provide Syria with defenses at higher altitude and longer range and with better tracking capability. He's quoted as saying it pushes the standoff distance a little more, increases risk, but it's not impossible to overcome, he told reporters. So he's still leaving the door open. He still wants to go over there. He also said, what I really worry about is that Assad will decide that he's got these systems, he's somehow safer and more prone to miscalculation. Now, we talked about this a few weeks ago, and you can listen to it on our YouTube archives at youtube.com/Patrick Riggins Show. You just go back a couple of weeks for the segment labeled Syria. But this is just one more conflict where we don't need to be meddling in. And when Russia does something to protect the bases, protect its legitimate interest there in Syria, we get all in a huff about it because we're wanting to go in there militarily. Yet another country in the Middle East where we don't really need to be sticking our nose into. All right, we're up on the first break here on the Patrick Riggins Show on the Libertarian Lighthouse Radio Network. I'll be sure and put that in there. And when we come back, we've got just a huge show. It's very packed. We'll talk about, of course, the IRS scandal, maybe some stuff about free speech, war, and we'll not even get into the drug war a little bit more. I got into it a little bit last week, and we may hit on that again before the show's out. So stay with us this hour for the Patrick Riggins Show. We'll be back in a couple of minutes. I'll bail out Micah and come in before that song gets too much further. Good. That is a good song, though, for this next segment we're coming into. We're going to address what that very song was talking about. But what I'd like to do is follow up a little bit on what we were talking about this last segment, this whole Syrian thing. Look at it from what I like to call, it's a libertarian point of view, but an original type of American ideal point of view. Now, a lot of people say that, well, libertarians are a bunch of peace-loving hippies. Well, I'll be the first to admit it. I enjoy peace. It's nice not to be at war, and that is the goal for which we need to strive. But that doesn't mean we don't have a strong military. But this military should only be used for defense of our country from attack. And even then, we still have to go to Congress to get a declaration of war. The president shouldn't be able to send our soldiers just anywhere he chooses without permission from Congress. Now, you'll say, well, some of you will say, a lot of you won't, but you'll say, hey, Patrick, we're the world's policemen. Well, no, we're not. Nowhere in our founding documents does it state that we are to be the world's policemen. In fact, our founders enjoyed being separated from all the craziness in Europe. And it's interesting to note, for me anyway, that a lot of these people screaming for intervention all over the world, they're a lot of the same people that are screaming for us to stay out of the world's business just a decade or two ago. We aren't the world's policemen because we don't have the money. We don't have the personnel. And more importantly, we don't have the permission from the Constitution. You see, if we're going to be the world's policemen, then we have to respond to every call for help, no matter how trivial. That's the role taken on by the police. You have to respond to all calls for help, not just the ones you want to answer, not just the ones where the state has a, quote, compelling interest. Otherwise, the government is picking and choosing winners and losers, something it is or it used to be restricted from doing. How would you feel if you called the police and they said, you know, we really don't care what happens in your neighborhood, so we're just not coming. Have a nice day. The unfortunate truth is that in some areas of this country, that's actually done. But it doesn't make it any more right than when we do it to another country, though. So what would you be left to do? Well, what do people do in some areas of the cities where the police either don't respond or take their time getting there? The people protect themselves through arming themselves, and things get taken care of on their own. The policeman role most politicians want our government to take on is really one of a highly trained security force, not police. They want a force they can send anywhere in the world for whatever reason they see fit. That's not the role of our military, or it shouldn't be anyway. If some dictator somewhere starts killing his rivals, starts eliminating people trying to kill him, if we aren't interested in that country, if there isn't any oil or minerals, then we aren't going to go help out. But if someone sneezes around an oil well in Saudi Arabia, we're there in a second. If an oil-rich country starts to collapse and it looks like the supply may be restricted or even cut off, look out. We're knocking on their door shortly. That's why our founders tried to ensure we had checks and balances in our system. The ultimate check being the right to vote. They wanted to be sure we had branches of government that would watch one another, fight with one another, keep each other honest. What this has become, though, is one big homogeneous leviathan that stretches out across the entire world. Not just our country, but the entire world. And this is the problem. This is why we need to vote out these people who are just sitting in Washington and enjoying their paychecks. As that excellent writer and libertarian Walter E. Williams noted once, if thievery is occurring, then it pays to be a thief. That's what's happening in Washington right now, people trying to get away with as much as they can because they know no one is really watching what is going on. And how can we? Not even the government knows everything that is going on up there. There are whole departments that cannot be reliably audited because there are no internal controls, nothing to flag something is missing. But should I digress? Back to my point, we are not the world's policemen. If we want to take on that role, then we need to propose a constitutional amendment to allow it, and they could get the permission of all the countries who would like those services and work out a way those countries can pay us for policing them in their country. Otherwise, we need to keep our military home and keep it strong and keep it ready to respond to attack, but only when we're attacked. And watching all this that's going on there in Washington, especially with this IRS scandal that's come up and all this, the AP and just everything that's been coming up, everyone's making excuses and pointing fingers at each other. Do you ever stop to think about how juvenile and silly it really is? How embarrassing it is that we don't have one person, and if you females in the audience will excuse this phrase, one man who has the guts to stand up and take responsibility for what has been going on. Obama. that could be his nickname because he is drone striking and bombing people. But Obama, Holder, none of them are men. They are little sniveling wusses who sit up there in Washington trying to get away with much as they can. Oh, sure, they're tough and mean when it comes to ordering people under them around. When it comes to sending our soldiers overseas to back up the tough talk they do from all the way back in Washington, sure, they're so-called manly then. But when the rubber hits the road, you see what happens. If you want to find out someone's true colors, find out their character, what they're really made of, put them under pressure and see how they react. It's a tried and true method. Police academies use it. The military uses it. Even a lot of business schools use that tactic. When someone's whole fight or flight reaction starts kicking in, that adrenaline starts flowing, then we'll see what that person's leadership capabilities and abilities are. Do they step forward and take care of business, or do they cower behind other people, blame others for mistakes their organizations made? I didn't know. I wasn't aware of. Those people were acting on their own. When you hear these types of things, what it's telling you is, I am too much of a pansy to take responsibility for the actions that are occurring. It's almost like you're watching a movie when you see coverage of government at all levels, federal all the way down to the local city council. A lot of the time it's like these people are asking you to suspend your disbelief. Stop questioning whether that could happen or not. Stop questioning whether what they're doing in the movie violates the laws of physics. Stop asking how these politicians couldn't have known about something going on right under their noses. Don't ask questions. Just sit back and enjoy the oppression, the nosiness, the busybodies in government wanting to run your life. That's what it's ultimately all about. If you look at the government's record, if you look at the timeline and how it has evolved, it makes it very easy to look down the road and see where it's heading. We're at the point on this government timeline where it is involved in literally almost every aspect of your life. Used to be you didn't have much contact with government. You took care of yourself. But that was our downfall. We stopped watching what it was doing. We lost that healthy suspicion of government. It has put on this robe of security and helping and providing. But underneath the robe is the tyranny, the oppression, the freedom and liberty robbing animal that dwells within all forms of government. If you'll stop and think about all this, you'll begin to understand I'm correct. Look around the world. Our government here in the United States seeks to control every country on the face of this planet. We are a global dominating force. Unfortunately, we are not using our power wisely. We are using it for the personal gain of the people in power and of the people funding those people in power. I have stories on two of those things right here in the stack if I get to them today. If not, you can go to our Facebook page and I'll stick them over there. The address for that's facebook.com/Patrick Riggins Show. You don't have to be a member of Facebook to view it either. Just type in facebook.com/Patrick Riggins Show. But back to my point, the government is just growing bigger and bigger every year. And if something continues growing, what does it do to everything else? Well, just like a wild plant in your flower bed, it will crowd everything else out. It will choke the other plants out. It takes away their water and nutrients, and eventually they die. And that's what's happening right now. The government's choking out private business. It is sucking up all the resources, all the money. And that's what both government and business use for life. Money's like food and water to us. So if government's pulling in more and more money, the sustenance for business, well, then eventually business is going to die. That's why our economy is tanking. That's why it's so hard for it to try and bounce back from the starvation that this government is inflicting on this economy. What this really do is just demonstrating the strength of American business and our economy to overcome just about anything. The fact that we are coming back a little. But as you can see, it's getting harder and harder to come back with the government getting so much bigger. Until one day, business just dies out and all we are left with is government. Now, some people will say I'm being fatalistic. Nope, I'm being realistic. Look at where we've been. Look at where we are. And look down the trend line. Follow that line out and see where it is heading. All right, we're up on the bottom out of their break here on the Patrick Riggins Show. When we come back, we'll talk about that scandal a little bit and get in a couple other things in about 2 minutes. Join us. All right, welcome back to the Patrick Riggins Show. Just a little red hot chili peppers. Micah doing a good job with the music in there. Jay, didn't Jay leave you a list, or are you just coming up with that stuff? Oh, we'll say he's coming up with it. All right. This segment, being how I'm on the radio and have a radio show, imagine that. I frequently get asked my opinion about what is happening in the news and about what I think about whatever's going on. Then, of course, this IRS story has just been dominating most of the conversations I've been having this week. I wanted to play a couple of clips here. Here's what Inspector General J. Russell George had to say about it Friday, in case you missed the testimony there. It's been all over the news. If you haven't seen it, well, you're just not paying attention, I guess. But here's a clip, what he had to say real quickly about the whole IRS thing here.
In closing, our audit found clear evidence that each of the 3 allegations were correct. Was the IRS using inappropriate criteria in its review of organizations applied for tax-exempt status? Yes. Was the IRS delaying their applications? Yes. And finally, did the IRS ask inappropriate and unnecessary questions of applicants? Again, yes.
here is what outgoing IRS Commissioner Stephen Miller, he said that partially in response to that.
I do not believe that partisanship motivated the people who engaged in the practices described in the Treasury Inspector General's report.
Oh, okay. So if you're sorting IRS nonprofit applications on the basis of partisan words, then that's the definition of not discriminating by being partisan. So I guess using that same line of logic, if you sort applications based on whether they're female, then that's not being sexist. Or sorting on the basis of they're black or Hispanic, that's not being racist. The fact of the matter is, if these applications had been sorted using liberal keywords, and this was a Republican president, the media would be howling and calling for the president's resignation. And the very hypocrisy of them is so glaring that everyone sees it. That's why no one is watching or listening to these news people anymore. Even Nancy Pelosi got in on the act with these comments. Now, I don't know if you've caught these, but she has guts.
They make so much of these issues because this president is such a great president. They will use the IRS. They will use the AP. They will use these as, again, subterfuges, evasions of what the American people want us to do here.
Wow. And last but not least, of course, President Obama came out and he gave this statement about just this whole mess, about everything that's been going on.
I know nothing, I see nothing, and I say nothing.
Have you noticed how the president and his people, including his apologists in the media, they're trying to spin the excuse that the government is so big he couldn't have possibly known what was going on. Now, interestingly enough, we don't accept this answer from the private sector. When there's an industrial accident, the media start crucifying the CEO, saying he should have known about whatever problems they had been having at this or that plant. Or if someone sues the company on a civil rights complaint, the CEO should have known about the atmosphere of intimidation that prevailed in the office. Even the Sarbanes-Oxley Act, that requires top management. They must now individually certify the accuracy of financial information issued by a company. It also mandates that senior executives take individual responsibility for the accuracy and completeness of corporate financial reports. But all that seems to be lost when it comes to the public sector government. When something happens there, it seems no one above the person being actually charged seems to have any knowledge of anything. In fact, they try their best just to cover everything up.
Okay, people, move along. There's nothing to see here.
Yes. Lois Lerner, she heads the IRS division that oversees tax-exempt groups. This whole thing started when she acknowledged this issue at a conference sponsored by the American Bar Association. Now, she confirmed that these organizations were singled out because they included the words Tea Party or Patriot in their applications for tax-exempt status. Now, in some cases, groups were even asked for their list of donors. Now, she says, Ms. Lerner says, that was wrong. That was absolutely incorrect. It was insensitive and it was inappropriate. And, of course, the IRS would like to apologize for that. So it's almost like they're saying, hey, we're sorry we couldn't dig up any dirt on your nonprofit's donors to pass on to Acorn. Yeah, well, we shouldn't have done that, and we're sorry. Okay, thanks.
Yeah. If you could just go ahead and make sure you do that from now on, that would be great.
Exactly, yeah. If you could just be sure and pull those applications listing Tea Party or Patriot on them, yeah, that would be great. Ms. Lerner also said the practice was initiated by low-level workers in Cincinnati. Same thing the president's saying. And was motivated by political bias, or was not motivated by political bias. So, again, it's not motivated by political bias. So, flagging applications for having political words in the application is not politically motivated.
What are you people? On dope?
Yes, exactly. A dozen Republican senators wrote to the IRS in March of 2012, and they expressed concern about the various accounts that the IRS inquiries were perceived to be excessive. And at that time, the IRS Commissioner Douglas Shulman told Congress that IRS was not targeting groups based on their political views. Absolutely no targeting. And he said this kind of back and forth is what happens to people who apply for a tax-exempt status. So here was this commissioner telling a congressional committee that nothing like what has now been reported was happening. Now, this is why it is so dangerous for the government to be constantly accumulating so much information about the citizens of this country. It can be used for bad things. Yet we have people who will gladly say, hey, I'm not doing anything wrong. I have nothing to hide. But let their political enemies find something. Or maybe they just get caught up in a general search of government databases. Let that sort of thing happen, and good people, well, they get harassed out of politics, out of backing legislation, out of voting a certain way, whatever. The whole scandal, though, is just a symptom of a much bigger problem. Let's say you got a cough and congestion, and it's because you have tuberculosis. But the doctor tells you, hey, let's get rid of that cough with some cough suppressant. That's just a symptom. The underlying sickness is much bigger. Same thing with this IRS story. That whole agency needs to be shut down. That's the sickness, the agency. All these other scandals are just symptoms of the bigger problem, too much government. And the Tea Party and other conservative groups from complaining about questionnaires from the IRS, do you have any idea how much information the government has on you? And it's gearing up to collect even more. Again, you can check our YouTube channel, youtube.com/Patrick Riggins Show. Go back a couple of weeks, listen to the segment on the National Security Agency's the big new data center outside Salt Lake City. If you don't want to do that, you can just Google it as well, NSA Data Center. The government is right now collecting your emails, your Facebook information, everything without warrants, trampling on the constitutional rights of Americans. This IRS thing is a drop in the bucket. The government knows that. Congress knows that. Heck, even the president knows that. But they'll have hearings. Maybe some people will lose their jobs. Someone may even go to prison. And the people of this country will say, hey, isn't that great? That scandal was discovered and those people were made to pay. The IRS got a spanking. We sure showed them. Now I can go back to not paying attention to the other huge, massive amounts of data the government is actively collecting on me, violating my privacy rights. You see, that's what people in government will say. You see, you can trust us again. We reformed that agency. We stopped this sort of thing dead in its tracks. In the meantime, the huge data center complex in Salt Lake City is being built and brought online. But we aren't going to point that out. Just go back to watching television and being ignorant of the bigger story happening. You know, we're like absentee landowners. We check in from time to time whenever we hear there's a problem. Then we go back to our homes and ignore the land managers mining all the gold out of our land and selling it, stealing from us while we tend to our daily lives. The only problem is when we check back after a few years, we discover our land's been robbed and the people who did it are gone. That's exactly what's happening in our country today, right now, as you listen to this show. That's why you simply have to start taking action to stop all this, to reverse this huge decline we're speeding down. Otherwise, we're going to wake up one day and nothing will be left. The Fed has all but trashed our currency, and when they are done and our dollar collapses, everyone will be looking around and wondering what happened. All right, we're up on the last break here on the Patrick Riggins Show. Boy, this show just flies by. When we come back, we'll find something to talk about. Maybe I'll pick up a little bit on that drug war we started with last week. When we come back here on the Patrick Riggins Show, join us in a couple of minutes. Show. I get right into it this segment. It's always a short segment coming up on the last of the show. Last week I hit on the drug war a little bit. Now, I want to finish what we were talking about because I always get a lot of feedback on that. And what I want you to do is think about the drug war in these terms. We are killing people because we demand they act a certain way in their personal lives. Now you say, but they're killing themselves, Patrick. Well, so I can do that quite effectively with alcohol. In fact, many people die from alcohol poisoning and alcohol-related accidents each year. But I don't hear demands to stop producing and selling liquor or beer. If we try to impose a religious morality on a homosexual person, everyone screams and yells that we shouldn't be telling that person how to live, that what they do in their bedroom, in their own house, that's none of our business. But let someone light up a doobie or take some other type of non-government approved drug, now it is our business what they're doing in their bedroom. They're in their house. All of a sudden, it's our business now. If we would stop this insane war, how many people would we be saving each year? How many lives? How many officers of the various agencies in this country would we not be wasting? Plus, we'd be going a lot more further down the road towards more personal liberty. Let's look at this in reality. There's always a certain percentage of people who are going to do drugs. There are a certain percentage of people who are going to drink excessively. And there are a certain percentage of people who are going to die every day. Nothing we can really do about it. There will always be a percentage of people who are not going to live according to how you live your life, how you think everyone else should live theirs. But if they aren't infringing on your rights, nor anyone else's, is it really wrong for them to live that way? Just because you don't agree with that lifestyle. I remember listening to Dr. Ron Paul speaking, and he once said, tolerance does not equal acceptance. Just because I tolerate what you're doing doesn't mean I accept it or that I'm going to live my life in that manner. But I have no right to impose my standards of living on you, just as you have no right to impose your standards on me. You may understand why everyone wouldn't want to be an astrophysicist, while others may not understand why you wouldn't want to be a contractor. But we don't say everyone should work a particular job or another, that everyone should work for a safe profession like a banker instead of a highly risky one like crab fishermen. A banker with a cocaine habit may live until they're 80 years old, while a crab fisherman in excellent shape, he may get killed at 32. Are we going to say the banker doing drugs was throwing his life away? That the crab fisherman in excellent shape didn't? Well, neither answer is correct because they're doing what they wanted to do with their lives at the time. It isn't up to us to judge whether they are making sound decisions or not. They were doing what they decided to do. Unfortunately, right now in this country, the government demands you bend to their requirements to live as it thinks you should. If you participate in activities that it doesn't deem legal, no matter that you aren't hurting anyone else, nor are you infringing on someone else's rights, it doesn't matter. If you are caught not living according to how the government says you should, then you will be made to pay a fine and maybe even put in a cage until you can learn to do so. Until you learn that you have to obey the government's wishes on how you are to live your personal life, or you'll be punished. Again, doesn't matter that you aren't hurting anyone else. Doesn't matter you aren't infringing on another person's rights. It doesn't matter. You aren't living how the government says you should be living. Therefore, you must be punished until you either agree to do so, or you maybe even die in your cage. Now, does that sound like a reasonable requirement to you? Does that sound like how a reasonable person should act? You wouldn't tolerate your neighbor or someone at work or even John Q. citizen on the street. You wouldn't tolerate them telling you how you should live your personal life, what you can or cannot do in the privacy of your own home. So if you won't tolerate it from them, why do you allow the government to do it? In legal circles, many times your actions are judged on whether a reasonable person in the same situation would have acted the same way. And if they wouldn't have, then you would be found guilty of whatever you're being accused of. But if the government doesn't act in a reasonable fashion, if it makes unreasonable demands, we just sit out here and let it happen and keep electing the same old treacherous people to office who continue to propose and vote for this garbage. These insane laws intended to tell you how to live, to regulate every facet of your life, every single little piece of your life. They want total control, and we keep sitting here handing our freedom and liberty over to the government, even glad to do it, eager to do it, sometimes in the name of safety or security or fairness, or whatever reason they have cooked up to take away more of your freedom. Now, that's why this radio show is here, to wake you up to what is going on, to make you think about what you're being told, to run everything you hear through a type, I guess, for a better word, a libertarian filter in your ear, through a filter of thinking about things in relation to freedom and liberty. All right, we're up on the end of the Patrick Riggins Show here. Another fun-packed week of, well, us sitting here talking about getting back our country. I want to thank you for tuning in again here on News Talk 98.7 WOKI. If you want more information about us, I mentioned this earlier, you can go to our Facebook page, facebook.com/Patrick Riggins Show, facebook.com/Patrick Riggins Show. Be sure and hit the like button. You can also go to our YouTube channel, youtube.com/Patrick Riggins Show, and all the archive shows are there. And if you want to, you can also drop us a card or letter to the WOKI Studios here on Old Kingston Pike in Knoxville, Tennessee. Thank you for listening to us once again, and join me next Saturday afternoon at 4, where we'll be fighting for freedom, liberty, and the restoration of the Constitution. Thanks for listening, and have a fantastic week.
Join us again next week for another solid dose of truth. The Patrick Riggins Show. Saturdays at 4 on News Talk 98.7 WOKI.